Yeah, hello everybody, welcome and thanks for joining us. My name's Sharon Quigley, and we're absolutely delighted that Insectarium is now open to the public as a live exhibition, following a slightly pandemic-related delay. And I guess we've all really missed face-to-face contact and connection over the last year or so, and those magical interactions that take place during exhibition previews and gallery visits in general. And I suppose in view of that, fact, that we're still unable to get together for a gallery-based event, my co-curator and friend Catherine Sargent and I thought that it would be a good opportunity to bring a few of the artists currently exhibiting at Waterstone House together with exhibitions coordinator Laura Grassani, to hear about the work being done by the SOC and also to listen to some of the artistic approaches to the brief in a series of short presentations, or well, informal chats actually. So we've really just left that in the hands of the artists. But as well as focusing on Insectarium, the Society of Scottish Artists collaboration with the Scottish Ornithology Club, we were keen to include Andrea Guiley's solo show, Wonder Wander, as part of tonight's event, which has been so harmoniously installed within the SOC grounds. Andrea is an SSA professional member and has made significant contributions to many SSA exhibitions in the past. And this just felt like a perfect fit for this evening's event. So the idea of Insectarium originally began germination as far back as about 2018. And it was the result of a chance meeting with Laura on the X5 bus up from North Berwick. And that's really where she planted the seed for an exhibition which would invite artists to respond to the beauty or, in fact, the fear inspired by insects, but an exhibition that would also highlight the important issues of rapidly declining insect numbers. And on my first visit to Waterstone House, I mean, I was immediately struck by the venue itself and its wonderful kind of inside-outside charm. I was really thinking how amazing it would be to discover an SSA member show in such an unexpected yet perfect location. And at that time, the SSA had really started a push to explore the breadth of venues available to us as an organisation, which would allow us to kind of continue to provide exciting exhibition opportunities for members. But it would also demonstrate, I guess, the scope thematic approaches to curation might allow us. But the rest was really down to Laura's development of an excellent brief that really struck a chord with so many artists and underpinned a hugely successful open call in this great exhibition. So I'm actually just going to hand you over to Laura Grassani just now, and she'll tell us a wee bit more about the exhibition and the amazing work that the Scottish Ornithologists Club does down in Aberlady.
Thanks a lot, Sharon. And thanks also, I take the chance to say thank you to all my SSA colleagues without whom I wouldn't have been at all able to undertake this project. So Catherine Sargent, Sharon Quigley, and Olivia Turner, who is in control of the machines there. But yes, I thought I would give you a little bit of background on the Scottish Ornithologists Club, the SOC. Just to give you some context, so it's a small charity created in the 1930s by people who obviously wanted to promote the study of birds and their environment. And from the outset, the charity included artists, and they decided to include from the beginning, really, as one of their objectives, the promotion of art related to natural history, as they say in the Constitution. And what happened next really is that over a period of time, the place of art became clearer for the charity. So the charity's aims are still the same, to promote an interest in birds and their environment. And to do this in a very broad way, so to encourage anyone, the general public, to take an interest in birds, join a guided walk where they can discover a little bit more, but also to gather important scientific data on bird population numbers and distribution. And the place of art in amongst that may seem a little odd, but in fact it's felt very natural to them that artists among their members were the best place often to communicate this passion. They had the means and the reach to a very wide audience. And so from really quite early on, the charity organized exhibitions. But it's only when the charity moved to Waterston House, which is in Aberlady on the edge of a bird reserve and in a very beautiful setting, that the building, which is purpose-built, was able to accommodate a professional gallery. And it is, I'm so glad, Sharon, that you mentioned that it is a beautiful space. So the program of exhibition has existed for a long time, but it's only basically developed further with the move to Waterston House. And the exhibition program is based around the simple objective of promoting art that depicts the natural world. Birds in particular, but importantly, not exclusively. It's not all about birds, it's really about nature. So we have 8 exhibitions a year, and we welcome a very wide range of people, which is one of the really cheering things from a personal point of view. One of the joys of presenting art in that context is that the people who come to visit may not all be accustomed to visiting art galleries. And that is so important to me personally, and a sort of byproduct of the charity's wide goals. So now to the exhibitions specifically, how did they come about and how do they fit in? Well, both Insectarium and Wonder Wonder are new beginnings for the SOC art program, really. And I'm so grateful for the input of others in that. In terms of starting with Wonder Wonder, the solo show by Andrea Geiler of sculptures in our garden, that is the first time we have such an extensive display of sculptures in the garden. The garden is to a large extent a wild meadow. And we kind of look at this and wonder why we didn't think of it before. But it's actually Andrea who saw the potential for this. And I must say, it's amazing to see the sculptures in that setting. They definitely enhance the garden, and the garden provides the most magical backdrop to the sculptures. There's a sort of contrast between the wilderness of it and the sculptures, which is just lovely. And again, very accessible, especially at this point in time. People who don't fancy being indoors can just amble about in the garden. It's joyful. Now, Andrea is going to tell you more about how the work developed, but we've been chatting for a couple of years about this. So again, the pandemic intervened and delayed, but Andrea's definitely started something for us. We will very probably continue doing similar exhibitions in future. And so on to Insectarium. Why insects? Well, when we started talking on the bus with Sharon, I was thinking because of the clear brief of the gallery to focus on the natural world, I thought what aspect of the natural world might engage the very wide and varied group of artists with very different practices that the SSA encompasses. And insects are just such a rich subject. I think it occurred to both of us that insects have this kind of double-edged thing about them. They are beautiful and they are collectible and they are just amazing in their designs. But they are also the stuff of fairy tales and horror movies, and they are carriers of disease and so on. So there's definitely the fascination and the fear there. And on top of that, as much of the natural world, they are under pressure, under great pressure. And it's now increasingly obvious that their demise would spell big trouble for a lot of other animals and for us humans, for sure. So there was so much meat to that subject, and we all hoped that it would elicit a very wide range of responses from this big group of artists that the SSA is. And indeed, it really has. And not only in the range of the media that have been used by the different artists in response to the subject. And that in itself is a joy. It encompasses, of course, painting, drawing, but also embroidery, small installation, photography, all sorts of approaches. But also in the fact that, as we had hoped, the artists have really explored all the aspects of the subject, the fascination and the fear and the environmental concerns, and sometimes all at once in the one artwork. And that is amazing, really. So all that remains for me to say is come and see the show in person if you can. And I look forward to hearing about each of the different individual practices that lie behind each of the artworks, but together they make an amazing display. So come and see the show at Inability, and it's open Thursday to Sundays, or have a look online. And
thank you very much. Thank you, Laura, for that great talk, and apologies that you did have a photograph you wanted us to show. Sorry that that didn't happen. So I'm going to introduce, we've got 6 wonderful artists, very different artists, and I'm going to introduce them one at a time. We have next, coming up, is Tess Chodan, based in Somerset, England, and she uses antique entomology. Tess spent some years working in antiques, and she now devotes her time to creating artworks using her collections of ethically sourced insect specimens. Some of you might have met Tess when she came up last February, just prior to the pandemic, when, as something that Laura and the SSA arranged, a trip to the National Museum of Scotland to see their national science stores. And I'm sure she'll tell us some of that as she speaks. So I would like to invite Tess Chodan to speak.
Right, hi everybody. Can you see me and hear me okay? Yes, okay, great. Hi from Somerset. I'm in my studio where I do all my work. I spend most of my time. I seem to have spent a lot of time, in fact, here since lockdown, particularly last year. But it's somewhere that I love to be, so I'm more than happy, to be honest, to be hiding here most of the time. And you'll see behind me that I have some lovely antique collector's drawers full of my specimens, and I did a quick reckoning. Actually, I've never really calculated how many I have, but I reckon I've probably got about 3,000 specimens in those cabinets at the moment. And the journey for me to my own kind of little world of insects. I have my own insectarium, is how I feel in Somerset here. I kind of live here. As Catherine was saying, I was an antiques dealer for quite a long time, and I was always collecting bits and bobs. But one day I happened upon an intriguing box, which, when I opened it, I discovered contained a collection of British moths from the early 1900s. And each one had its own individual little label in beautiful copper plate script detailing the specimen and the person who'd captured the specimen. And that was it. It was a bit of a love affair, actually. It was the light bulb moment, I guess, for me. And I instinctively made my first artwork. I don't have any art training at all, but obviously there is an artist in me kind of struggling to get out, and has been for most of my life. So that was that. You know, that was how I started, and since then I have made work in Australia, where I lived recently. I was commissioned by a state gallery to create an installation just before I left, which was a fantastic honour for me. And my kind of journey continues, my obsession continues, because the thing about insects is that they are an obsessive compulsive disorder. When you first fall in love with something of this beauty, it doesn't really ever leave you. And I've discovered a bit of a world of obsessive compulsive collectors. And they've become mentors to me, actually, which has been brilliant because I knew nothing from the start. And so I've taught myself over the last 7 years a little bit about Lepidoptera. Not too much, I know a little bit, I guess more than most people, but I'm still scratching the surface. So just to talk very briefly, because I know there's lots of other people who need to talk, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Citadel. Which was, it's an unusual piece for me because a lot of the work that I make uses moths and butterflies, but occasionally I use bees. And in this piece, as you can see, I've used honeybees, which were sourced from a friend's hive. So the thing about bees, of course, is that they have natural life cycles, and at any given point in a year, there's many hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths of these little creatures. And more often than not, they're kicked out and left to, you know, turn to dust. So what I do is I collar all these beekeepers and I ask them to keep these dead bees for me. They think that I'm completely bonkers. But over the period of around 6 months, I dry them out and use them in my artworks, and I like to gild them, actually, because I think they work well with gold. It kind of somehow exaggerates their form. I think they're such precious creatures anyway, for us all, obviously, and for the planet. It just made sense for me to make them into these little jewels. So I painstakingly use a gilding technique. And in this particular piece, I was very lucky to find a circuit breaker, an industrial circuit breaker, which worked so well in terms of the recent developments or understanding of how bees harness electricity using their wings. And when they land, well, so when they fly, as is quite common with winged insects, they do generate small amounts of electricity. And they've been discovered to use this to actually communicate with each other, which is remarkable. And to find this circuit breaker was just, you know, a gift from the gods, because I was able to get into it and obviously put my little bees inside. And I really love that contrast between, you know, these rugged utilitarian objects and the delicate, you know, these incredibly delicate creatures, which, you know, once they are protected as they are inside these objects, will last for centuries, actually. You know, insects, once they're dehydrated, can last, I've seen insects that are from the 1700s. So yeah, it's an honor to be part of the show, and I feel very lucky to be in such fabulous company. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Tess. That was really insightful. I'm going to move on next to Janet Melrose. And Janet works from her studio, and she's visiting us from her studio on the banks of the River Erne in Highland, Perthshire, Scotland. And her work is concerned with the natural environment and our impact on it. She makes paintings and drawings of incidents that she has seen, overlaid with childhood memories of walks in the wood. And Janet studied fine art, drawing and painting in Edinburgh College of Art under John, I never know how to pronounce his name, Bushby, who's a well-known wildlife artist. I'm sure many in the SOC will know him, and also William Bailey, and she graduated in 1987. So I would like to invite Janet now to speak a little bit about her work. Thank you.
Well, hi, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this. I I'm really interested. Well, first of all, I was quite interested in this idea of people becoming obsessed with things, and it triggered a memory in me. When I was very young, I used to collect insects, dead insects, and put them into Tic Tac boxes, and have them in neat little rows and pretend I was in my kind of own little exhibition space. And it was just hearing Tess talk about her collection that's triggered off that memory. This piece that I made, I was given the boxes are cigar molds, which I was actually given back in 2015. And I just enjoyed them as objects. I had no intention of doing anything with them. And I had them lying in my studio, and occasionally I would catch a glimpse of them. But it was one of these things, it was actually beginning of 2019, I had come back from a trip to Thailand, and I brought some mulberry paper back with me. And I was kind of experimenting with things and doing some prints and just kind of playing around. And I happened to just begin to kind of play around with ideas and words. So, you know, my thinking is it's cigar mold, then it's a cigal, then it's a cicada, and I kind of play with this. And then I started kind of forming shapes and playing around with the mulberry paper. And of course, that again triggers off other things. So I was thinking about when I was a child again, looking at nymphs and dragonflies, and you know, seeing them crawling up the stem of the reeds and the ponds and various things like that. So the actual process and my ideas were sort of working simultaneously. So I at this stage I wasn't making insects, I wasn't making something for this exhibition. I was just playing around with ideas. But through that process, I started to sort of ask questions, you know, what would occupy these shapes, these long shapes, and then I started kind of squashing the paper into it. And of course, that reminds me of cocoons and chrysalis, and again, there's this kind of layering process where one idea leads to another, just as a change takes place in moths and butterflies and dragonflies, where the kind of soup of cells, as I like to think about it, reconfigure, reconnect, and create something else. And again, this is how I tend to think of my ideas, where they become something that emerges. I make sort of connections between one thing and another, and I found, you know, the whole thing quite sort of quite interesting. And it's taken on a sort of another layer of meaning, because obviously during lockdown, where I was sort of disconnected from a lot of stuff that I would normally be involved with, I found that my own practice began to change. So this piece now has a kind of another layer of meaning, which is unexpected, and in some respects, for me personally, it's you know, it's become quite sort of poignant. Another change is taking place. So yeah, so fairly straightforward, and obviously my sort of is fascination rather than fear of always sort of looking and making connections between things, and I still have this need to line things up and have things in some sort of order, and repetition is quite a big part of my practice. So insects and the collections of insects, that would be something that really engaged me.
Thank you very much, Janet. That was really, dare I say it, fascinating to hear about how you have been fascinated by insects since your childhood. And it's great to hear the story of this artwork. And I'm going to invite next Kit Martin to speak with us. And Kit Martin is based in the north of Fife, overlooking the Tay towards Dundee. And Kit studied biological imaging in Derby and has worked in both medical and forensic photography. She is interested in detail, texture, fragility, and the infinite beauty of nature. Kit makes cyanotype prints, both from objects and digital negatives. Saying making as well as taking photographs, she has made the move from analog to digital, but she's old-fashioned at heart and loves to make a print in the darkroom or in the sun. So I'd like to invite Kit Martin now to speak to us a little bit about the work that she's been involved with. Thank you, Kit.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thanks for asking me along tonight to be part of this. This is great, and I really look forward to seeing the exhibition soon in person. I can't wait. So yeah, I'll just kind of tell you a little bit about myself, and I'll talk a bit about this print, which is called Hastening Quick to Their Decline. So I like to work in the darkroom, as Catherine said, for at least some of my process. I really enjoy working with historical photographic processes like this one, cyanotype. It's a versatile and accessible process that I can use either with a negative, as I've used in this case, or, as Catherine also referred to, with objects directly, and even the sea. I also make lumen prints, and I work with pinhole photography and other experimental processes as well in the darkroom. I do use digital too. To make a print like this, I photographed the insects, made the composition in Photoshop, and then I printed out a large-scale negative, the size that I wanted the print to be. Paper is then coated with cyanotype chemicals and contact printed, either outside in the sun or in a UV, an ultraviolet exposure unit. So even when making an addition from a negative in this process, each print will be slightly different because of the hand-coated nature of the chemicals. I connected with Bell Pettigrew Museum in St Andrews University a few years ago for an exhibition with some master's students who were studying museum and gallery studies. And since then, I've been very lucky to have worked with other natural history collections, which I adore and feel very happy amongst. The hoverflies in this print, all three of them are hoverflies. They're all specimens from the National Museum of Scotland's entomology stores, because I've been in there rootling around as well. I'm drawn to creatures that are not necessarily the most iconic or popular. For example, hoverflies are brilliant and essential pollinators, but it's the bees and the pretty butterflies that tend to get all the press, I suppose. I had an exhibition in 2019 at Verdant Works in Dundee. That's Dundee's jute museum for anyone that doesn't know. And it was about pollinators and wildflowers. So, you know, I've had an interest in insects for a long time, but I have been focusing on them in my work for a few years now. And for that exhibition, I enjoyed making some digital work on paper, on fabric, and on film, which I displayed in light boxes. And I also made fabric and jute paper cyanotypes for the exhibition too. And I was lucky to get access to Dundee University's herbarium for this one too. So I had some 100-year-old wildflower specimens along with the insects. And I'm mentioning this just to get across my interest in and enjoyment of experimenting with photography in different ways. So this print takes its title from a poem called On a Fly Drinking Out of His Cup by William Aldous. He bothered to write a poem about a fly, and I quite like that. And also the title's obviously hinting at the more, you know, depressing side of things, because lots of hoverfly numbers are in decline. and we need to reverse that. So my plan is to continue to work with insects, to celebrate them and bring them to more people's attention with a new body of work that will take me back into the National Museum of Scotland's entomology store when I'm allowed to get back in. So I hope too to be able to photograph some of the people involved in communicating the importance and wonder of insects to us, including hopefully the assistant curator of the entomology stores in Edinburgh, in the museum. And then meanwhile, I'll be outside over the summer hanging out with the insects, just watching them going about their business. They do give me hope. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kit, for bringing to our attention the lesser loved insects in this world. And next up, we've got a little film by an artist, Greta Macmillan. Greta is based in Portobello, Scotland, and Greta is a creative practitioner in many forms: art, music, film, and metalwork. Greta uses an eye gaze computer, which can see where she is looking, so that her eyes become both the mouse and the cursor. And this enables her to paint, play music, and to communicate. So I believe we've got a little film that Greta has very generously made for us to listen to tonight. Thank you.
My name is Greta and I use an eye gaze communicator. I live in Edinburgh. I paint with my eyes and I talk with my eyes. I'm an artist. Let me tell you more about my art. This is a vinyl we made of my painting and stuck on the wall. It's my favourite and I think it's quiet and loud. I have had 5 exhibitions of my artwork. A team of graphic designers and printers called their branding work really hard to get it ready. Lots of people came. This is my biggest. It's in the train station and I love it.
We've been working particularly with a young artist called Greta Macmillan in Scotland, and she uses eye gaze technology to paint with. And she did a painting of Staffin Beach in Scotland. And so this exhibition is a 3-dimensional walkthrough of her painting.
Yeah, eye gaze technology is an iPad that is in front of her. So to communicate, she looks to press a button to speak and to communicate.
I understand everything, but sometimes need time to answer.
And with her painting, she picks the colours and she paints the lines of the painting, all using her eyes.
We visited the Paragraph camp in Sweden. We put the metal rod in a very hot fire. Then we put the hot metal in a clamp and bent it round by walking in circles. And we put dents into it with a big clamp. I was really proud of my metal work and will go back next year. I loved working with Jessica. She made me feel I could do it really well. My S1 art homework was to draw insects. I studied films of them and how they move. I tell Mum what to do in Photoshop with my eye gaze communicator. My dad listens to my directions and makes the wee beasties. New beastie.
New beastie, yeah.
Jenny Bottom.
Jenny Bottom, yes. Jenny Bottom, yeah. Next bit.
Jenny Top.
Jenny Top, yeah. Okay, got that. That's a nice one. They're all nice ones actually. Next, New beastie.
New beastie.
New beastie. This is quite a bizarre collection. Wait, looking at that.
Moth Bottom.
Moth Bottom, let's do that. Yeah, start with that.
I make them all different.
And we've not got many left. We've got
Moth Bottom.
a moth bottom. Yeah, I've started with the moth bottom, yeah.
I made a mistake.
Yeah.
This is Alan the laser cutter, who cuts my wee beasties. The perspex are the best and bright. I love selling my work. I'm an artist. I paint with my eyes. It's important to me.
Okay, well, that was great. Thanks to Greta and those that helped her make that film. I'm not sure if anybody's able to be with us tonight, but we've got that lovely work to see, and I've popped the website up. So next up, we have Norman McBeath. And Norman is a photographer and printmaker based in Edinburgh, Scotland, and originally studied psychology at Stirling. Norman has worked in several prominent art institutions, such as the National Portrait Gallery Scotland, and also the Portrait Gallery in London, which hold over 70 of his works. Norman has collaborated with poets and with the Easel Press, producing books from some of these collaborations. He's also had a number of award-winning writers produce original work in response to his photographs. The poet Paul Muldoon describes him as having that rare ability to allow nothing, least of all himself, to come between the subject of a photograph and the perceiver. So I'd like to invite Norman now to speak, and we've got his work, Fatal Attraction, on the screen. Thank you, Norman.
Thank you very much, Catherine. What I'm going to do tonight is just to read you some of my thoughts about how I came across this work, how the work developed, and what it meant to me as I was working on it, and also tie that into my other work and see how that all fits in. Insectarium. All artists rely on ideas, and these have to come from somewhere. Sometimes they come from introspection, sometimes they're developments of previous work, and sometimes they come out of the blue. Insectarium is a really good example of something I wouldn't have thought of myself, but as soon as I read about the SSA's invitation to respond to the world of insects and they offered the chance to visit the National Museum's entomology collection, I sensed this was a valuable opportunity. In there somewhere was a gift. I just had to find it. The visit to the entomology collection was fascinating. We were shown a remarkable selection of insects, all shapes and sizes: beetles, flies, wasps, butterflies, moths, dragonflies. We also heard about some of their life cycles and the importance of insects to our ecosystem, so there's plenty to think about. So far, I felt the emphasis had been on collecting information, but what I really wanted was some kind of original and creative response, some new ideas from what I'd seen and thought about. I happened to mention this to a friend, and to my surprise, she said that she had something which had been in a cupboard in her studio for years and might well be of interest. A few days later, we met up and she handed me what I thought was a large, well-worn encyclopedia. However, I soon found out that this was not what it seemed. When it was opened up on the table, I couldn't believe what was in front of me. Inside was a huge collection of insects, a couple of hundred at least. 3 tropical-sized dragonflies on the right-hand side gave me a rather a fright, but on the other side was a collection of moths which didn't seem at all alarming. I knew immediately that I'd found what I was looking for. I loved the artifact itself, the mysterious book, the surprise of the discovery, and the way the secret collection was. It was so much a subversion of the usual tight conventions associated with insect displays. Here, most of the collection were displayed almost randomly, scattered freely, rather than being made to look like part of a bizarre regimental parade. This brought a feeling of life to these long-dead creatures, as if they'd somehow been attracted to the open box and were about to land. I felt that they'd each been given more of an individual identity with this new freedom of placement. And as I looked closer, beyond the moths themselves, I noticed the hundreds of little black pinholes in the white base, evidence that this collection clearly had a long history, and that this curious box had seen many different arrangements and specimens in its lifetime. I'd like to say just a little here about how this particular photograph ties in with my work in general. Chance and discovery are often involved in my work, whether in printmaking or photography. In printmaking, this is perhaps more conspicuous in the process, but in photography, it's right at the heart of what I do. I love the magic of serendipity. I'm constantly drawn to what I see as the beauty of the everyday and which I believe is so often missed. This is to do with a fundamental curiosity and fascination I have about the natural world. For example, I'm just finishing a collaboration called Perdindosi with the master potter and artist Edmund de Waal, which includes a series of black and white photographs of chance discoveries of leaves when they're just at the stage of decay and eventual disintegration. I mentioned right at the beginning about sensing an opportunity for discovery when I heard about the idea of the Insectarium exhibition. This joy of discovery is what I felt so strongly when the box was opened and its bizarre secret revealed. But now to the collection before I finish. I didn't want to miss out the labels which I liked so much and which have been attached to some of the moths. The unmistakable trace of a fine nib, handwriting from a past era, and details of where the moth had been caught. I felt everything in front of me was so bizarre and raised so many questions that I was glad of these fragments of information. You might be able to make out the writing on a label on the right-hand side of, in this case, about twice the side of the tiny moth it's tied to. It says it was caught in the New Forest. And you can see another more legible one below and to the left, which says the moth was caught in Melrose in the Scottish Borders. But the information I found most interesting on these labels were the dates. These showed that many of these moths had been caught well over a century ago. That was a time when we had such different awareness and understanding of ecology and the importance of insects to the planet. In fact, I've since learned that in the last 100 years, over 60 species of moths have been permanently lost. These ancient dates led me to think about how the moths had been caught in the first place all that time ago. Light was the lure, and I see light as the lure for me too in much of my work. But in their case, light led to their capture and death, hence the title of this photograph, Fatal Attraction. So my thanks for listening, and thanks too to my good friend, the award-winning portrait painter, Jennifer McRae, for letting me into the secret of her magic encyclopedia.
Thank you very much, Norman. And yeah, a very good friend you have there with a great encyclopedia. So that's the artists that have been speaking about who have work in Insectarium. And our final artist to speak tonight is Andrea Gale, who has a sculpture exhibition in the grounds of the Scottish Ornithological Club. Andrea is a visual artist based in Edinburgh. She was born in Germany and initially studied printmaking before studying art and sculpture in Hanover. She's been working from her Edinburgh studio since 1995, and she is best known for her cotton steel projects. Her contemporary art practice explores urban and rural landscapes through drawing, sculpture, public art, and social engagement. Her artwork investigates, condenses, and interprets nature and ecology. So I would now like to invite Andrea to speak about her work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me tonight. It's been great actually being included in this group. I've been finding it very interesting hearing all my colleagues talk about their practice and their ideas. Yeah, so welcome to my world, which is, I call myself a landscape artist. I never paint, but I do almost anything else with the landscape. You see me in my little office and at home actually. My studio space is a very dirty metal workshop, and I can't really do any filming there, no live links or so. So I thought I'll do it here. This is a bit my ideas board, which is constantly changing, and it just depends on what practices, what projects I'm doing. And then I kind of collect material just to keep me focused on whatever I'm trying to achieve. About 5 years ago, I was on a residency in northeast of Scotland in Huntly with Devon Projects. And the project was actually about energy in the landscape. But during that time, as so often happens when you're supposed to think of one thing, and then you just in the background, you just notice these ideas appearing. And there was suddenly, I thought, birds, wildlife, animals, because up to that point, I've only been really working with trees and plants and botanical imagery in my work. And I suddenly just, something clicked, and I got really fascinated with little models of animals. They had to be local animals. I was very clear about that. And I also knew I had to kind of remodel them. I needed to find a different way of looking at them. So I started modeling some myself, found objects as well, and just did a lot of trial and error. And then 2 years ago, kind of made the first sculpture. So it took quite a while actually to just go through different stages, and then came up with the piece that you see on the right. And that was very much, I had a kind of beach scene in mind, or beach landscape. And then I had a meeting with Laura, and suddenly I knew what I wanted, which was kind of maybe exhibit at SOC, because I thought this just totally fits along the ways I was thinking. So I took some photographs just to kind of, which was actually really early in 2019, I think in March or so, I took the photograph. And then took it back to the studio and covered it up and didn't see it for another year or so. And in the meantime, I was busy trying, making lots of little models of other birds, and started bronze casting them, resin casting, and also giving them a voice. So what's happening now is basically all my animals have open beaks and open mouths. And so I'm trying to indicate that they actually trying to communicate with us humans. That's basically the most significant idea behind it, that I really wanted to give them a voice to, and also to be able to accuse us a little bit. On the left-hand side, you see a very recent work which happened during the winter, during lockdown. I was working towards this exhibition. I knew I needed some significant tall work, quite high work. And because I knew that I had watched the garden at the SOC all of last summer and the summer before that, and I knew the wildflower meadows would grow quite high, so I thought it would be very good if the work gets half covered, but that there's still enough on top that's going to be visible. So I think with all the uncertainty last year and going into the winter, I just really felt I had to compartmentalize my life a little bit. And so I thought, cubes, boxes, I just need to put all my ideas into single boxes, and then I'm just going to stack them up and build my own environments, and just build lots of kind of environments that you can change. And so that's basically what happened. Just to kind of finish it, so on the top is a bird with an open mouth, open beak, and then the third block is plant cells, and then going down, so it's all different ideas around mathematical formulas in the blocks, and then the natural environment in each of the cubes as well. So thank you very much. I think I have to stop. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. That's really great to hear. And it's lovely to see both those images next to each other. So, I mean, we did suggest that we could, you could put any questions in the chat box, but I think it's such a small group that if somebody had a question that they could just verbally say it, though if you'd rather I spoke your question out to you, I'll happily do that.
I have a question. Andrea, that cube piece is really gorgeous, and I've got a practical question because my mind's always thinking practically. Did you make it, and is it all welded together, or did you make it in individual bits and then weld it together on site?
So ideally, they're not going to be welded together. So there's, for instance, in the exhibition is one piece that's much taller. So this one is about 2 meters 1 centimeter, and the other one is over 3 meters tall. So they're normally just stacked up so that you can actually change the order of them. But for this show, because the photo I showed you, the piece called Sehnsucht, they're quite small cubes, and I was a bit concerned because the ground is quite uneven, and I didn't want it to fall over. So for the exhibition, I just put spot welds on just to secure this. But I did it in a way that I can just very easily take it apart again, and then I can add to it. I can take blocks away and kind of just build what feels right for the site. So
yeah, because they've got a lovely, very lightly stacked feeling. But then I was just thinking they're metal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, some of the blocks I've been doing, they're really heavy. You need 2 people to lift them, because they're so big. I'm working on even bigger ones at the moment. So, but I'm really obsessed with it at the moment. I think I'm on my kind of 15th block or so. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I had a question for Jeanette. Sorry, Janet. I cannot say it in an English way. Yes, I was going to ask you, Janet, about the importance of nature for you as a source of inspiration, because I got the feeling that it had been there at the beginning, and is it still the source of the starting points of many of your ideas?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, as was said in the introduction, I met John Busby when I was at Edinburgh Art College, and he was running a natural history course. So I took the opportunity to join him. But I mean, when I was really young, I was always out and about exploring, digging up things, just observing stuff. So, and that's continued. And I said this fascination that I have with collecting. I mean, my studio has become a kind of part sort of collection of objects that I use in my work or reference, or it just kind of triggers ideas. And yeah, that is the catalyst. As I said, my practice probably has, sort of changed during lockdown. I started to sort of think more about thought processes and patterns of thinking. But again, I'm still sort of referencing nature, natural subject matter. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know how much you can see of my studio, but there's all sorts of bits lying around, birds' nests, and I got an obsession with picking up some sticks. The idea of poo sticks and taking them to the river and allowing them to float down, and this, people naturally pick up things on the walk, and something that my daughter and I are we're working on a collaboration at the moment. Something that I'll probably put together towards the end of the year in an exhibition that we'll have together.
Thank you, Janet. Norman, there's a question in the chat box asking, is it digital or analog photograph? It has a very whimsical, romantic sepia look about it. And was this also important?
It's a digital photograph. I used film for a long time, but I've been strictly digital now, and I found that really very helpful for this. It doesn't actually. I love the prints that come from digital printing. They're so much like the prints in printmaking because it's ink on paper. So there's a very textural, sensuous feel to it. So in making the print, I was very pleased that I was doing it on a digital print. As I mentioned earlier on, the age of these collected insects really impressed me. I wasn't expecting that at all, well over a century. And I decided to just give it a look towards that, to make it a bit, to emphasize that the antiquity of it really, and give it a mood, give it a feel that was in sympathy with the antiquity of the object itself.
Okay, thank you. I have a very short follow-on question. On your website, you talk about that you have a number of writers have been influenced or by your photographs to write work. And do you think anybody might take this photograph, which you've titled Fatal Attraction, and write something?
Well, I don't know, it's very interesting. Throughout the whole journey that started when I, as I say, first saw the open call, so many other things have happened. It's one of the great things about an idea like this is that it stimulates people's perceptions, it stimulates my perceptions, it generates ideas, and these spread. I think this event tonight is a very good idea, also because it spreads the idea, and so you have all sorts of things happening of which you couldn't possibly predict the outcome. So who knows? It's a very fertile area. There's so much that we've heard tonight that's just fascinating, not just from the artist's point of view, but people's reactions to it. So I think anything could happen, really. I like the idea of the potential going out there, and so I really think that is another layer of the benefit of this whole project, the potential that has yet to be realized.
I had, well, following on from that question for Norman, I had a question for Kit. Old media or new media, analog or digital, which is your preferred area, or do you kind of balance them both?
I do probably work mostly with digital nowadays. I do have a couple of cameras that are analog, and I do have a lovely big one that does, big 5x4 negatives or prints. And I use it occasionally, but it's kind of something I'd like to move into a bit more. But yeah, at the moment, I kind of work with the digital start, like, taking the photographs and then making the negative digitally on the computer for the print that's in the exhibition, and then making the print by hand, so coating and contact printing. I do a fair bit of that, and as I sort of vaguely alluded to as well, I sometimes use the cyanotype process, but at the seashore, and so then there's no camera at all. I'm coating paper, and then I'm letting the waves and sand and things make the image. And I also just briefly mentioned lumen printing, and that's using objects, and I actually use things that have died, placing them on photographic paper and making images, with some chemical reactions there. So it's a bit of both, but I would say probably primarily digital.
Thank you. I see there's another wee follow-on question from Judith, saying that the works in the exhibition all have an almost nostalgic look to it. Were the curators surprised by this? So Laura and Sharon, that's a question for you.
I'll just quickly say that, I kind of, I knew that there would be a lot of reference to the history of collecting, because that's something that we're kind of all really addressing at the moment. Historic collections and how appropriate some of it is. So I did know that there would be, but also the subject matter lends itself to, as Laura was saying initially, you know, to fairy tales and to storytelling and to mythology. So I knew that there would be kind of a lot of historic references. I mean, I don't see that as being sort of nostalgic as such. I see that as actually being kind of that just all being part of the sort of rich fabric of the exhibition and the subject matter, really.
I didn't think of it as nostalgic particularly either. But I must say, at that first visit to the National Museum collection, I was struck by the activity of collecting itself, and how that in itself is a really interesting, the collecting is actually a very interesting subject in itself, and it is treated by some of the artworks in the exhibition. But that actually is one of the elements that surprised me, that I hadn't thought about, that collecting as an activity is a rather weird thing that merits some scrutiny and some understanding of why it is done, and it's possessing, it's organizing, it's controlling, it's a sort of manifestation of our fascination, as well as our desire to own it, to control it. Yeah, so that element I was surprised by, the collecting as a subject. And I think Tess' work actually really chimes with that. And in fact, I had a question for Tess, if there is still a little bit of time, to ask Tess about, I've seen a few of your pieces, and I often think there is an element of man versus nature there, Tess, and is that what's on your mind, or not at all?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually, Laura. I hadn't really thought of that, actually. I suppose, of course, you know, we are human and these are non-human. So there is that, you know, interaction and interplay, I guess. And I agree with you, actually, about collecting. And because I'm kind of scraping the surface with my tiny collection compared to the collections of other people that I've met. I'm kind of getting an understanding of what it is, you know, to collect, and why people do it, and how it becomes this kind of obsessive pastime. And I don't have any answers to that, really. I suppose for me, things like, you know, the circuit breaker that I used in the Citadel, I've always been drawn to these, you know, these objects which have had a life, you know, for decades before I've ever touched them. So that in itself, you know, is fascinating to me, and I guess what drew me to be, you know, working in antiques for such a long time previously. But, you know, just in terms of collecting, I have to tell you that I've got to know one of the kind of greatest collectors in Europe. He's become a bit of a mentor to me. And he, over time, has showed me around his own collection of probably about 3 million specimens. So that gives you a little bit of a kind of context. And he's a world authority on aberrations, which are kind of natural variations in normal patterns and colorations in kind of insects, particularly in butterflies for him. And he has a collection of these aberrations. So, for example, a British peacock specimen that doesn't have any eyes. So it lacks the actual, you know, that normal circular patterning. I've actually got one myself, which is quite an interesting thing. But he has, you know, one butterfly in his collection worth £10,000 to £20,000, just one, which is, it kind of, you know, that raises this whole idea of collecting to another level. And obviously that's to do with kind of monetizing this whole obsession. But, you know, there is a rarity factor as well, which is also fascinating. And, you know, underneath it all, I think, underneath all of it is just this human need, I think, to be surrounded by nature. Actually, that's what I think underpins everything, certainly for me and everyone here, I'm sure.
I think that's a very good point, Tess. And I'm not sure if there are any more questions or if this is a good time to draw it to a close and say thank you very much to Olivia Turner, who is the president of the Society of Scottish Artists, who has been holding the doing all the background things for us. Thank you. And to Laura Grassani, who works and has been curating and coordinating both exhibitions at the SOC, and to Sharon Quigley, who, for those of you who don't know, was at the time this exhibition was conceived, she was the president of the SSA. And a very special thank you to our 6 artists who have talked so eloquently and so insightfully about their work. And for those of you who haven't seen it, please have a fantastic day out at Aberlady. And if you are unable to travel, the images are available online, and I put the link up in the group chat. And you can find that through the viewing rooms of the SSA, and also the information can be found in the SOC. So thank you very much to everybody.